Imagine that you are a design engineer and you've created an exciting new product. The product is called the human immune system. And you're pitching it to a strictly no-nonsense manager. Let's call him Jan. I think we all know at least one Jan. How would that conversation go? Jan, I've got this fantastic idea for a new product called the human immune system. Oh, please don't frown. I know it looks a little complicated. I'm not going to take you through all of the details, but I do want to share with you some of the key features of this product. First of all, it cleverly uses the idea of redundancy by having millions of copies of leukocytes, white blood cells, and other components before they are actually required in order to create a buffer against the unexpected. And it has not only leukocytes, but B cells, T cells, killer cells, antibodies, and other components to create a barrier against virtually any threat that evolution has been able to conjure up. And the design of this product is completely modular. There is the surface barrier of the human skin. There is the very rapidly acting innate immune system. And then there is the highly targeted adaptive immune system. Together, if one system fails, another can kick in, and they can create virtually foolproof protection. Now, please stay with me, Anne, because here is the killer feature. The product is able to adapt to threats that it's never even seen before by developing highly targeted antibodies. And it does this with great prudence, not only reacting to every tiny threat, but also remembering every previous threat in case it crops up again. Finally, I'm not talking about just some simple standalone product here. I'm talking about a product that is totally embedded in the broader system in which it participates, namely the human body, creating a virtually foolproof level of protection. So Jan, tell me what you think. And Jan may say something like, well, first of all, I sincerely appreciate the passion and effort that's gone into your presentation, but you seem to be telling me that this product of yours is complex, it's siloed, it makes it up as it goes along, it reacts to things unnecessarily, and it's designed for somebody else's benefit. Frankly, it's total nonsense. It goes against everything I've learned about business. Okay, I'm exaggerating slightly. In the short run, efficiency is always important. And if we went with Jan's philosophy, probably would end up with a more efficient immune system. More bang for the buck. What could be more sensible? Unfortunately, there's a tiny problem. And that problem is that the host, you or I, would probably die within 1 week of the winter season beginning because the system lacked resilience as soon as we met a new strain of the influenza virus. I first became interested in biology and business when a tech company CEO asked me a very interesting question. The question was, in our here today, gone tomorrow business, how can we make sure that we build an enterprise that lasts 100 years? Sounds easy, right? Every company lasts 100 years. Well, not quite so easy. Here is the average age at death of all companies in the US. And you can see that the average company in the US now lasts only 30 years. That's less than half of the life expectancy of the human beings that work for that company. 30 years, you may say. With investor pressure, why, as a CEO, should think about 30 years? Well, here's something that should keep you up at night. The 5-year mortality rate of public corporations in the US, in other words, the chance that your company will not be around in 5 years' time because it gets taken over or fails, is now a staggering 32%. That's 1 in 3. That's relevant to anybody's tenure and anybody's NPV calculation. So coming back to our CEO's question, where better to turn to advice than nature, that's been in the business of life and death for longer than any corporation? So I called my friend, professor of biology at Princeton University, Simon Levin, and together we looked at a variety of biological systems, from tropical rainforests to fish-resonant forests, and we asked the question, what makes them enduring and resilient? And what we found was that the same 6 principles, from redundancy through to embeddedness, cropped up again and again. And we found these principles applying not only to biological systems, but also to long-lived social systems like empires, religions, and, yes, you guessed it, companies. So let's look at some examples. Firstly, what happens when the corporate immune system collapses? This beautiful building, is part of the Shitennoji Temple complex in Osaka. It's one of the oldest Buddhist temples in Japan, and it was built by Korean craftsmen at a time when the Japanese could not yet build their own temples. And he created a company called Kongogumi that amazingly was still around 1,428 years later. It became the oldest company in the world, 40 generations. How are they doing today? Sadly, the 40th generation owner speculated during the bubble period of the Japanese economy, could not repay the loans on the real estate speculation, and the company was taken over by a construction company. It became the oldest company in the world to fail. After 40 generations of careful stewardship by the Kongo family, the company did not employ the principle of prudence. Speaking of company failure, we all have heard, we're probably all sick of hearing the example of Kodak, the company that virtually defined film-based photography and is now the icon for failed companies, having declared bankruptcy in 2012. But more intriguing is the question, why was Fujifilm in the same business, faced with the same challenges, at the same time, able to survive and thrive? Well, Fujifilm used its capabilities in chemistry and materials science and optics to preemptively diversify into a number of other areas like cosmetics and medical systems. And overall, it was able to adapt its portfolio to survive and thrive the threat of digital photography. As the CEO put it, the strategy succeeded because it had more pockets and drawers, in other words, more options than the rivals. Fujifilm employed the principles of prudence, diversity, and adaptation. An even more dramatic example. A calamitous fire like this one completely wiped out in a single evening the only factory supplying Toyota with braking valve parts for cars. And car production came to a grinding halt. The ultimate test of resilience. How many days did it take Toyota to recover car production? 5 years? 1 year? No, just 5 short days. How was Toyota able to do this in 5 days? Because it had organized its supply network in such a collaborative fashion that it was able to work rapidly and smoothly with suppliers to repurpose production from plants that previously made other things. Toyota employed the principles of modularity of its supply network, embeddedness in a collaborative supply chain, and functional redundancy of capacity. Now, fortunately, few of our companies burned down, but we do read in the newspapers every day about companies being wiped out by technology disruption. How was it then that the consumer optics giant, Essilor, that makes spectacles, has been able to survive technology disruption from technologies like lens printing technology? Well, Essilor carefully scans the horizon for potentially disruptive technologies. It acquires them unconditionally before they've come to the attention of competitors and become prohibitively costly. And it develops them even at the expense of wasting money and even at the risk of disrupting itself. In other words, it stays ahead of its game by employing the principles of prudence and adaptation. Now, you're probably thinking, if these principles are so powerful, why are they not more commonplace in business? Well, there's a clue in how Jan reacted to our pitch at the beginning of this presentation. Before we can implement these principles, we must first think differently about business. Typically, we think about business like this: cause and effect, what I call mechanical thinking. We have goals, analysis, plans, and we optimize and we maximize efficiency. Don't get me wrong, this is a really simple and powerful way of solving business problems, relatively simple ones in relatively stable environments. In fact, it was a pretty good approach to business in general until about the mid-1980s. So how do we deal with those more complex situations that we now increasingly face, like predicting the impact of a new technology or preparing for an unforeseeable financial crisis? Well, we employ biological thinking. We use the 6 principles that I showed. It's basically about thinking more modestly and selectively about when and how we deploy influence rather than control. It's a bit like the difference between throwing a stone and releasing a bird. A stone would go in a straight line towards the intended target. A bird certainly would not. Sound complex? Sound a little theoretical, perhaps? Not at all. Maybe there are some startups in the room. Every startup naturally thinks in a biological fashion. After all, they don't have the scale to buffer change. They don't have the resources to engineer their environments by brute force. And they live with a constant awareness of the tough odds against startups surviving. Now, the irony, of course, is that all of our large companies began as startups, but somewhere along the way, we lost that biological thinking capability, that adaptability. Whereas you or I may stoop and wrinkle as we age, companies become complex, they become internally facing, they become more short-term oriented, they become less adaptive. Eventually, they grow more slowly, they innovate more slowly, and they fade or fail. So what has all of this got to do with technology? Well, a great deal. Technology can be the life force and the platform for adaptation of a company, or it can be a dead weight. It can be a cost on the system, a source of rigidity and complexity. So we need to make sure that technology is not the static plumbing of our enterprises, but is the sensory system, the nervous system, the immune system, and the learning brain, not only of our enterprises, but also of our enterprises' extended ecosystems. So, my suggestion is that in addition to thinking about the traditional question of strategy, namely, how good is my game, how competitive is my game, we spend a little time thinking about the new second big question of strategy, namely, how long will that game last, and what can we do with technology to ensure that that game lasts longer? Thank you very much.